And welcome back. So this here is another video, the first one for Milestone 4. And Milestone 4 kind of came out of nowhere with no advanced information, and there was lots of updates. I should also mention that all of these topics are timestamped, so you can check in the description or at the bottom of the slider and go to whichever section you feel is necessary, although all the information should be fairly useful. So starting at the top, number 1, they have elemental armor and the combat triad. The 3 armors are now pierce, crush, and slash armors, and depending on what type of armors mobs are equipping and what type of damage you're dealing, you do increased damage or you can take decreased damage depending on what their resistances and such are. Next is we have a bunch of new drops and items, and we'll go into those in detail. They have the Alpha Buck, which now has a new model and greatly increased stats. He's actually like a little mini boss now. The Wisp also has got a substantial buff. He's also quite threatening, and we'll go over that in detail as well. I have a quick start guide for real newbies who are joining in here to get them up and running, and after the quick start guide you have some options because there's multiple different gear sets that you can aim to get at this point. They also have a new Orc model, which we'll look at. Weapon speed changes. There's been some adjustments to the weapons and the DPS. That multiplied with the new elemental armor bonuses and resistances changes things up quite a bit. Gala has sold yet another NFT pet, an eagle pet, and that has some unique characteristics which we'll go into. The mob AI has changed on multiple different mobs. One of the most substantial would be that goblins can run at certain points. There's been multiple different user interface adjustments to accommodate this new elemental armor and combat triad. And with all of these updates, of course, there's going to be bugs, and we'll go into a few major ones there and how they can potentially be exploited if that's something you're interested in doing, and then finishing off with my final thoughts as per the norm. So let's get started here. So the first slide on elemental armor and the combat triad. So as we can see in this picture, there are 3 different colors of goblins. There used to be only green goblins, but now there's green, brown, and yellow, and their models all got updated as well. And depending on whether they're in the light or in darkness, they do look a little bit different. So sometimes the greens look a little bit like the yellows, and sometimes the browns look a little bit like the yellows as well, depending on the lighting, but they all are quite distinct. Each enemy now has a specific damage type that they can be weak to, and they all have a different armor type as well, which we'll go into. So the goblins are an exception because they all do the same damage type regardless of what kind of armor they're wearing, and we'll go into that in detail. There used to be 2 types of goblins, one color which was green, and each one was an archer and a hunter. Now there's an archer and a hunter for each of the goblin types, and the interesting thing is the hunters and archers now do the same amount of damage, and they also, both the hunters and the archers of the same color, have the same drops now, which is something that's new in this particular build. Also, the kill order is different on what you should be prioritizing depending on what kind of armor and or weapons you're using. For example, if you're using the spear and you're wearing the armor that gives you bonus to pierce damage, then you're going to want to try to kill off the yellow goblins first because you'll do 100% bonus damage to them. And the same can be true for other goblin types if you're using different weapons, although there's really no reason to use anything other than a spear, and again we'll get into that in a bit here. Here are the full sets of elemental armor, and to the best of my knowledge I was the first person to get the full set of all 3 sets, which I got in a period of just hours after release. And we can see a few different things. So they each have, like, the toughened leather armor set gives you additional slash damage. buckled set gives you additional pierce damage, and then the bronze set gives you additional crush damage. And each set, if you're wearing the 3-set bonus, will give you additional 50% damage to all mobs. However, if the mob is also weak to that type of damage, then you'll do an additional 50% damage. Also, you'll take less damage versus a different type as listed in the 3-set bonus, and that applies to each different 3-set armor type. There's a lot of variety in gameplay min-maxing that you can do to fully capitalize on this, although it's not the easiest to do simply because switching your armor in combat is not a particularly simple task because there's currently no armor switching hotkeys as of yet. Now, there's also, besides the 3 sets of new armor, there's also a new cloth armor, which interestingly enough is also a material to use the set bonus armor as well. So you end up having to make 3 sets of the cloth armor to fully upgrade all of the different armor types. And on to the next slide here. So here we have the actual material Triad itself. So at the top here on the right, you can see how the boots are highlighted. That means those are equipped. Each one will highlight depending if you have multiple pieces equipped. And on the left and the bottom it says player, and the right it says enemies. And that's essentially meaning if the player is wearing slash armor and the enemy is wearing pierce, then the player will do additional damage against that particular enemy. And the same goes the opposite way. If that enemy is doing damage to you, you'll gain additional defense. And it's 50% flat bonus armor, which greatly reduces the damage you take, and it works out to be about a 60 to 70% damage reduction in most cases, which is very, very useful. So the way it works out, so wearing slash armor does bonus damage versus mobs with pierce armor. Wearing pierce armor does bonus damage versus mobs with crush armor. Wearing crush armor does bonus damage versus mobs with slash armor. And going the other way, wearing slash armor takes less damage if the mobs do pierce damage. Wearing pierce armor takes less damage if the mobs do crush damage, and wearing crush armor takes less damage if the mobs do slash damage. Now that's not the easiest to actually remember, especially when you're in the middle of combat and knowing what you're supposed to equip with what. So by the end of this video I have a quick summary as to what you should essentially be wearing in what scenario, and kind of the really easy way to do it, whether you want to do damage, or the easy way to do it if you want to have survivability. And this is the last slide on elemental armor in the combat triads. So I have a little chart here of how much damage you take if you're wearing a full 3 set of either pierce armor, crush armor, or slash armor. And as you can see, against the alpha buck, if you're wearing pierce armor, you take less than half the amount of damage. And with the wisp, if you're wearing crush armor, you take less than half the amount of damage. And despite what damage the archers and hunters of each color type are weak against, if you're wearing slash armor, you take almost 1/3 the damage from all the different types of goblins. So the average person is likely going to be wanting to wear slash armor if they're worried about survival. Now, when you have a full 3 set, the wolf and the buck only do 1 damage to you regardless of your armor type. They're essentially irrelevant at that point. The main thing to be looking for is the goblins, alpha buck, and the wisp. Now you're like, oh, well, the wolf and the buck have damage types that they do as well. Yes, but the damage that the wolf and the buck do to you when it's relevant, you're not going to have the 3 set bonus at that time. So once you do get the 3 set bonus where you would kind of worry about their damage type, you've already out geared them at that point. So they essentially become irrelevant. So here's a video showing wearing pierce armor versus the yellow goblins, which did a bunch of damage. Now I'm using the same armor, but this time attacking brown goblins, and you're seeing it's taking a lot more damage, or a lot more attacks to kill the brown goblins. And the reason for that is that they're not vulnerable against pierce damage. Now we're on to the item drops. So you can see the different icons for the different types of items. There's the Lesser Essence of Pierce, which is dropped by the doe. That used to get dropped by the Goblin Archer. It's now equally as rare, unfortunately. Lesser Essence of Crush is dropped by the Buck. Lesser Essence of Slash, which is dropped by the Wolf, and that's the same as the last build. And these are 3 new items. Regular Essences of Pierce, Crush, and Slash. The Pierce is dropped by any brown goblin, so it doesn't matter if it's archer or hunter, they both drop that. The Crush is dropped by any yellow goblin, and the Slash by any green goblin. Now, the interesting thing is, getting the Slash is a little bit more difficult than the others. It's not that they're harder to kill. The problem with the green goblins is that they're a rarer spawn than both the yellow and the brown goblins. So trying to get the Slash is a little bit of a nuisance. The regular essences, however, in general are fairly common drops. I wouldn't really worry about them too much. The very last item I was to get was actually the Lesser Essence of Pierce from the does. So despite the mob being the easiest mob that doesn't even attack you, getting the armor related to their drops was actually the very last thing I got because the drop rate is absolutely abysmal on those items. Now here's the first of 2 slides where we show all the new actual armors that you can get. In the top left you see the Gambeson armor. That's the cloth type armor you can get from the outfitter. All of the other armor pieces you get from the forge, which is either the simple forge or, in the case of the Village of the Earl, the large forge. So the top 3 on the right side, tough leather gloves, tough leather boots, and tough leather armor, that's the Slash set. The Bronze Brigandine armor, the buckled leather boots, and the Bronze Brigandine gauntlets, that's the Pierce set. So that's the high DPS set. This is the second of the slides and the last of the armor sets, the bronze plate set. So you have the bronze gauntlets, the bronze greaves, and the bronze plate armor. And these require quite a lot of bronze, so you need to be farming quite a bit of tin and copper to get these. When you combine all of this, you have 3 full sets of armor and 1 starter armor piece, which is a significant upgrade from just the 3 pieces of armor total that we had in the last build. So we went from 3 pieces of armor to 10 pieces of armor with this build. And here we have the new model for the Alpha Box. So before he was more of a tan color, now he's much more darker and menacing. He also has his hit points dramatically increased. But previously he had the same amount of hit points as a normal buck, which was 11. Now he has somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 150 to 200. It's a little difficult to calculate exact amounts because you can't see damage, and you also have to take into account resistances and such. His damage output has gone up immensely. He previously did 25, which was the same as a buck, and now he does a base 80 damage. A full set of gear gives you 40 base armor to a specific type. So the fact that he does 80 base damage is significant considering you only have 100 base health, up to 130 with the appropriate matching Vox. He does spawn in quite a few places around the map, and I've seen him near the first Goblin Camp, I've seen him up near Outpost 2, I've seen him in the Red Forest, near the bridge that goes towards the Wisp Waterfall, and I've even seen him up near the Wisp Waterfall. So I'm not 100% certain how many spawn points he has, but it's quite a few to say the least. And he does spawn relatively quick. An interesting thing which we'll see in the bug section is whenever he spawns near goblins, the goblins all aggro onto him, but they don't attack him, meaning that they completely bug out and then you can just kill them as needed. And I have a video that shows that a bit later. He's completely vulnerable if you attack him from behind, although I didn't get it on recording, unfortunately. At one point I had 1 health and I went in to attack him when he had full health, and I was able to kill him with only 1 health by sticking to his back or sticking to his bum area the entire fight, and he just simply couldn't hit me. Also, if you're wearing Pierce armor, you're going to be able to defeat him really easily, because instead of him hitting you with 40 something damage a hit, he'll only hit you with 20 damage a hit, which you can easily out heal with bandages in combination with trying to stay behind him. So the new Alpha Buck is actually really quite easy to defeat if you fight him right and if you're using the appropriate armor. So here I'm not using Pierce armor, and this is kind of how much damage he does when you're not using the right armor. You see in the bottom left, he takes like big chunks. I was nearly full health and he took me down. Now this time I am actually using Pierce armor, and I fight him a bit better as well, and you'll see how very little damage. See, if you're behind him attacking, he does no damage to you at all. And he kind of runs away every once in a while, then he charges you, and if you time it right, you can get on top of him without getting hit. I was a little slow there. But you can look at my health in the bottom left, and you can see that I've taken very little damage from him so far. So you tried to hit me there, but I was staying behind him. Yeah, so I took maybe 10% of my health bar without using any bandages, wearing Pierce armor. See? Pierce. Now, with regards to the Wisp, there's been some changes to the Wisp as well. They still have very high hit points. He is, however, incredibly aggressive. Has his ranged attack as previous. He both attacks and moves fast like he did before. The only difference now, instead of him doing like 10 damage or 20 damage, whatever it was that he was doing before, essentially nothing when you have actual gear, he now does 80 base damage. And he attacks like every second. So if you say have 100 health and you're wearing anything other than the armor that's strong against him, you'll be taking 40 something damage a hit, meaning within 3 seconds you're going to be dead, or within 4 seconds if you're wearing a Vox you can be dead. And that's fast enough that even if you're sprinting towards him, if he aggroes onto you immediately, he can kill you before you even get a single hit on him. Now, if you're using Crush armor, which is very resistant against him because he does slash damage, then he's only going to hit you with 20 damage instead. The fact that he does move around a lot plus doing 20 damage, that's enough that you can heal through. And what you want to do is do a bunch of damage to him relatively quickly, because once he gets lower on health, he starts to run more, which means that you can heal up very easily. So he's only really dangerous at the very start. The other thing is he moves around a lot, which means that he can run through goblins and the like, which then aggroes the goblins onto you, and that's another whole issue to deal with. So the Wisp in this current build is by far the most difficult enemy to deal with. Even if you have the right armor, if he aggroes a lot of people, then it could be a bad shape for you, to say the least. Here we're on to the quick start guide. So we have a full video. It's a little over 5 minutes to show you how to get the initial stuff set up. This is really only for newbies, so if you've been playing any significant amount in previous builds, you probably want to skip this, but any newbie will likely want to watch it. The main thing is you need to get 14 flax and 2 pine, and that's 7 harvests of flax, the plant, and 1 harvest of a pine tree. Doing this allows you to get your cloth armor, which is the Gambeson armor, and craft your wooden spear, which is the all-rounder best weapon. So once you have those 2 things, you can survive to some extent, and you can do as much damage as you could reasonably do with a weapon, minus the bonuses you get from 3 set gear pieces. So this is here starting off in the guide, and in front of us is the outpost number 1. Our first thing is to try to either get some flax or to harvest some pine, and we're lucky enough to see a little flax here to start, which is good. If you're incredibly lucky and there hasn't been many people on in this particular area, you can actually fully gear with flax and pine just outside of Outpost 1. However, this guide will assume that's not the case and that there will actually be people playing, in which case you'll have to go towards Village of the Earl, which is by far the easiest way to gear up quickly. And the whole process is 4 to 5 minutes long. I do stop to fight a few mobs along the way. If you really wanted to, you could have stopped back into Outpost 1 to craft your spear just to be a little more survivable. But this is a fully geared character that I'm currently using for demonstration purposes, so I didn't do that. The other thing is, if you're experienced enough with the game, you could probably skip that step anyway and just simply run if you cross any mob that could be a threat to you, such as a wolf. You want to grab a little cotton along the way if you see it as well. Sometimes you can see some flax through this area outside the hamlet. Yeah, and there we go, we got some flax. Now we're heading through to the area that's going to the entrance of the Splinterwoods area. A lot of people call this Deer Fields as well. Although this was where the Splinterwoods portal was originally designed to be. And it's really fairly simple. It's a straight run through from the Citadel straight to the village of the Earl. And you should definitely grab some cotton and or flax if you see it on the way. And this particular area through here, it tends to be fairly plentiful with cotton. Although apparently there's been quite a few people playing because I don't see any cotton through here whatsoever. Although we do see some deer, bucks. Oh, there are a couple cotton on the left. If you're really aggressive with trying to gear up, you can kill some rabbits and stuff as well on the way, and that'll help you get your sinew for your bow. And you can kill some does and some bucks to maybe get some essences and a little bit of meat and leather. Now, as you can see, this is the reason why we came to this area to get flax. And of course, a buck actually aggroes onto me, so... Like I said, if you didn't have the weapon already, you could do that, just run from him. Although it's very quick to easily just finish him off. It's only like 4 hits. Despite them getting double the health in this particular build compared to the last build, they're still really just a pushover. And we also have a couple wolves coming at us, which is not particularly common in the Village of the Earl area. But you do see that occasionally. It's really rare to see a goblin in this area, but I've also seen that on rare occasion. So like I said, you want to get 7 flax, and we have 12, so we're going to get 1 more, because each one gives us 2. And there we go. So we have 14 flax total, which is what we need, and we gathered that 1 pine tree at the start. So we have enough to make our spear as well. So the next thing is simply just crafting those items. So we're going into the south entrance of the Village of the Earl, which is the reasonable way to do it. Most people will probably want to stop in and bind to the cemetery right there. It's on the way, so there's really no reason not to. Taking your first right there, we're now going through the southernmost roadway in the Village of the Earl into the Outfitter. And the Outfitters, we're going to craft some linen fabric, and we're going to also need some linen thread. See, we'll grab a couple linen thread, and the rest is all just linen fabric. There we go. Now we can craft the Gambeson armor. Very good. Now you could equip that immediately, or you could just run over to the wood shop over here to craft your spear and then equip both. You don't usually get attacked in the city, so it's not too much of an issue. Now, the spear needs a pine pole, so 1 pine pole, then craft the spear, open up your inventory, right click on the armor, and then right click on the spear, and you are good to go. Now, we're going to talk about the weapon guide. So the previous build, the spear was the hands down winner in all cases. There was no comparison whatsoever. This time there's been some changes. So the dagger has had its speed increased from 2 seconds per swing to 1 second per swing. So you attack twice as fast, which is the exact same amount that the spear does. So technically the dagger and the spear have the same DPS. The reason why you use, really no reason to use the dagger, however, is that the spear has longer range. So it still beats out the dagger in all cases. Now you're probably like, oh, well, what about these elemental armor sets that do increased slash damage and crush damage? That's got to be good, right? No, it's not. It's complete trash. So the sword and the hammer attack very slowly. They attack so much slower than the spear that even with this bonus damage, it still does less DPS even against the mobs that are vulnerable to slash and crush damage. So I'll give a specific example. So the spear does 7 base DPS. That's an average of 4. They do 4 to 10 damage, which is an average of 7 damage per hit with a 1-second swing timer for 7 DPS. DPS being damage per second. Now, if you're wearing a 3-set bonus, you get a 50% damage boost to all enemies regardless of their resistances. So that brings you up to an average of 10.5 DPS. So let's look at the sword and the hammer. So the sword and the hammer does 3.5 base DPS. It's the same average damage per hit as the spear, however they attack twice as slowly, so their base DPS is twice as bad. So let's say you're getting the plus 50% bonus by wearing a 3-set. That's great. And then let's say you're also getting another plus 50% bonus because you're attacking a target that's weak against either slash or crush damage. That'll give you 100% bonus damage. But 100% more than 3.5 is just 7, which is the base damage that the spear does without any bonuses whatsoever. The spear also, if you're actually attacking a mob that's weak to spear damage, like let's say a yellow goblin hunter or a yellow goblin archer, then you're actually doing 14 DPS against those targets, meaning that they die within seconds. You just simply shred through them. At the present, the spear is the best weapon in all cases. Now, you're probably like, what about the bow? The bow's got to be useful. Well, the bow also does pierce damage, which is the same as the spear. You can have both a ranged weapon and a melee weapon. So, yes, you should have the spear and you should eventually get the bow. Although, honestly, you could probably do without the bow if you really wanted to. So in this video, I'm highlighting the actual attack speed. So you see the spear attacks really fast. It's every second. So we're going to equip the dagger, and you're going to see, well, yeah, let's see the dagger. Oh yeah, look at the dagger. Attacks every second as well. That's great. Much better than the 2-second time before. Now we're going to attack the sword. And look at how slow this thing is. Occasionally it glitches and does a faster attack. But yeah, 2 seconds. And then the hammer is slow as well. Like you're just waiting forever for this thing to swing. So again, a 2-second attack speed. So the sword and the hammer are just not comparable with the spear, which as you can see is very, very quick. Now, with regards to mob AI, there's been some changes. So first off, the Wisp was previously the only mob that could attack you that would run away at low health, and it still does that now. However, its overall aggression has increased. If it sees you anywhere near you in your range and it's high health, it'll absolutely destroy you. The doe never did attack you and it just runs away. That's the same as previous builds. Both the alpha buck and the buck have the same sort of attack patterns, and they mix with a combination of attacking and a combination of running. So, and it's not related to their hit points. They follow the same attack patterns whether they're at 100% health or only 1% health. The wolves are aggressive in all cases. I've yet to see a wolf run away. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I haven't seen it. And the goblins are the ones that have had the most significant change in terms of their AI. So all the goblins, whether it's a hunter or archer, and whether they're green, yellow, or brown, they do have a chance of running away at low health. They don't do it all the time, and I'm not sure that the reason they don't do it all the time is that it's a % chance, or that sometimes the point where they would start running away, I have less than 1 full hit worth of damage to do to them. So there might be some variation there. However, previous to this build, the only thing they did was attack you until they die. So that's definitely a difference. Somewhat a little bit annoying. You have a mob that's almost dead, and instead of you being able to finish it off, he runs back through all the other mobs, and they usually chain pull. And then going to try to loot that mob that just ran away also makes it so you aggro even more mobs, and given the fact that it's only a 1-minute loot timer, a lot of the times the loot simply rots on the corpse and you don't get the chance to loot the items. So here's a video just showing the mob AI. And that one was low health. You can see the guy in the back there running away. He's not showing any actual animation, he's just kind of sliding for some reason. And I'm going to finish off these archers. They die really quick because I'm using the pierce armor with the pierce weapon. And you know he's low health because he's not attacking you, so he'll die in one hit, like always. There you go, see, insta-dead. The new Orc model, which I think looks kind of cool. They got the little top bun, he looks pretty beefy, he's green, as you'd expect an Orc probably is. The previous build, the Orc and the Human were using the same model, which was a little bit odd. The Halfling, however, is still using the Dwarf model in this build, and I do suspect, however, that come Milestone 5, which, if they're following the same rate of release that they went from Milestone 3 to Milestone 4, will probably be within the next 6 to 8 weeks or so. Now that the Orc is in a different model, it actually changes their gameplay somewhat. So orcs naturally have a longer melee range, which means that when you're kiting mobs, you can outrange them somewhat. So if you have good ping and you're very good at mobility, you can make it so you don't really get hit. The other thing is, if there's you and another player going to chase a mob, you tend to be able to hit that mob before they can. So you can get a little more DPS in. Now, in the kiting perspective, the orc, because it's bigger, do have a higher collider, so they can get hit from a little bit further away. So it does balance it slightly, but they still have overall more melee range. Probably the biggest advantage though is their height. So unless you're trying to duck under things, having additional height means that you can see on a better angle, like your actual camera angle is different. So you can see your surroundings much better, and in a game like this where visualization of things is quite difficult due to all the flora and fauna and the fact that it's first person, the increased visibility is a substantial benefit to a particular race. So the orcs now have that. Now here I'll just go over some basic UI changes. So one thing we notice is that total armor values are now listed. Not just, it doesn't just say armor, but it actually says it for each type. So slash, pierce, and crush. Even if you don't have the 3 set bonus, pieces of armor have different amounts of armor against each different type as well. The other thing is bow now adds arrow damage. So previously what would happen was the bow, if you equipped and unequipped arrow, when you looked at the bow, it didn't show any additional damage. Now, depending on what kind of arrows you equip, and there's only currently wooden arrows to equip, but there are additional arrow types in the game files like obsidian arrows and glass arrows, fire arrows, etc. Those now directly add on the damage to the bow as you're seeing, and it's also listed as pierce damage. Another thing is when you have the 3 set bonus, the armor gets highlighted with this orange, and the set bonus then also becomes highlighted when you're looking at the actual armor set. So not alone do you see that it's highlighted, but it lists what type of bonus armor you have, and you know when it's actually into effect. A lot of the armors kind of look somewhat similar, so if you have, say, all the different armor pieces, if they didn't highlight it like this, it wouldn't be easy for you to quickly look to make sure that you have your full set equipped. So definitely a benefit. There's also material Triad, which I didn't show on this particular one, but we will show you that in a future slide. However, that is bugged on ultra wide screens, and you will see that in particular in the bug section as well. Now we have the Eagle Pet. The Eagle Pet was recently released on the Gala Game Store, but not as a specific NFT, but rather as a collection gacha box, with the Eagle NFT being a 100% drop rate from that gacha box at a cost of $450, which is mid-priced in terms of the pets. The dragon was originally $2,500, and the hawk and the phoenix had prices for tier 1 just slightly under $200. Now the Bald Eagle does have some benefits. So there's the extra inventory space, and who doesn't welcome extra inventory space? But the real kicker, and currently unknown, is the hotkey functionality. And this could be very, very powerful depending on what that functionality actually is. Now that they have this elemental Triad, the ability to be able to switch armor would be immensely powerful if you could simply hotkey and switch all your armor pieces instead of looking through your inventory and trying to click on each different armor piece while you're actively in combat, which is not a simple task. One of the hotkey functionality is to do this. This particular pet will become very powerful. There are some other hotkey abilities that could be beneficial, however. Extra weapon hotkeys is always nice. Once they balance weapons to actually be useful to having multiple different weapons other than just a spear. Ability hotkeys would be nice as well. The equivalent of the Q, E, and R attacks that they had in the very first Mother playtest. And if they had any additional consumable slots. Currently we have 3 consumable slots, which is a bit uneven considering you have different kinds and different levels of, say, stamina or adjustment items, and it wouldn't be all that bad to have an additional slot for, say, a bandage, so when you do run out of a bandage, you could quickly just switch to your other bandage slot instead of having to go into your inventory and put it on your hotbar in the middle of combat again. Okay, so here are some bugs. So the first slide of bugs. On the left hand side is a picture that I took. That's what it looks like on my ultra wide monitor, which is very hard to see what you're actually looking at. And the one on the right, the standard, is taken from a person in my guild who was kind enough to share me their screenshot, and that was Gulliver, for anyone wondering. So the Triad button, as you can see here, gets shifted over to the left on the widescreen monitors, and because the button gets shifted to the left, the actual overlay, the material Triad overlay, also gets shifted over to the left, which instead of putting it over your paper doll ends up going over your items, your armor and weapons and the like. And the problem with that wouldn't be so much that it's going over top of that, but what makes it even worse is the fact that it's in the background. It has transparency. If it was in the foreground, it wouldn't be too bad because you only look at the Triad when you really want to look at it. So this is definitely something they're going to have to adjust. So this next bug is quite interesting and is incredibly exploitable. So in the back there I have circled the alpha buck. Now you can see all of these goblins, they're all frozen in place and they're simply staring at the alpha buck. None of them are moving, none of them are attacking. They're not attacking the alpha buck, they're not attacking anyone around you. You can literally just go up to them, kill them, and loot them without them doing anything. And you could do this even without any armor. So if you wanted to exploit this, if you ever see an alpha buck nearby, kill all the goblins, loot them all, and then kill the alpha buck, or just simply ignore the alpha buck. And the reason why you wouldn't want to do it the other way is that if you kill the alpha buck, they immediately become on aggro to the alpha buck and they become aggressive to you again. And I intentionally do it that way in the video that's following, just to show you what not to do if you wanted to exploit it. If you want to play legitimately, however, you'll do what I did in this video and play it the actual real way. I did kill one mob as well in the exploitative way. However, I didn't loot it again just to show people what this bug actually is. So here's the video. You see they're all frozen in place, and I can go up to them and kill them without any issues whatsoever. See, they don't even try to attack back. They kind of turn towards you every once in a while, but they don't actually attack. So I go up to the alpha buck, and I'm going to assume I have on the pierce armor, which would be the kind of armor you would definitely want, and based on the damage he's doing to me, that's definitely the case. So I loot him. Immediately after he's dying, you see all these mobs that are within range of me aggro onto me, and the mobs that were not within range, which are these ones turning red, going back to their normal pathing location. Very interesting the way that works. So, some final thoughts, and I have quite a few on this particular one. So the first thing is, after all this information I provided, most people are simply going to be like, what do I equip and when do I equip? And that's a reasonable thing. So if you're full on savage mode and you just want to do as much DPS as possible, and you're either a pro kiter, or you want to burn through your bandages to reckless abandon, or you simply don't care, you want to go full max DPS, equip your spear, equip a 3 set of pierce armor, and never take it off. That's actually my strategy for the most part. Now, the average person is going to die an awful lot like that. You'll probably be spending most of your time in purgatory. So I would recommend for most people to do the following 3 things. To wear the full 3 set of slash armor as a default, because that'll dramatically reduce the damage that you take from goblins, and most of the time you'll be fighting goblins. However, if an alpha buck comes by, it could be worth it to switch to your pierce armor to take a lot less damage against the alpha buck, unless you can stay from behind on him, in which case it doesn't really matter if you have any armor or not. The last one I would definitely recommend to almost anybody, and this is something I would even do, is if you see the Wisp and you have the full set of crush armor, switch to the crush armor like immediately. Stop what you're doing and switch over, because the Wisp will absolutely wreck you. It's kind of ridiculous. In terms of what I think about this, I'm quite impressed that they came out with all this in the time that they did. Up until the Milestone 3 release, they were giving weekly updates, and they kind of stopped doing that, which had me a little concerned why they suddenly stopped giving any updates. And then out of nowhere, they make this release. And this release has, you can see from the video, has a lot to it. So the fact that in 6 weeks they did all of this, if they maintain that level of release, it won't take all that much time before we really start to get a really fully developed game out to us, and that certainly is reassuring. I'm not terribly fond of the fact that Gala keeps pumping out the NFTs, especially on NFTs that still have not been into the game. Like the dragon was originally released 4 full years ago now, and that's still not playable. Yet they're releasing new NFTs, new NFT pets in particular, and they're even saying what the utility of these NFT pets are, where they didn't even confirm what the utility of the dragon is as of yet. In terms of gameplay though, this adds a lot of depth to it. I'm a big min-maxer, so I'm going to have a lot of fun with this particular design, and yeah, I'm looking forward to what we're seeing here. In this particular background picture as well, this is at the Wisp waterfall, and the Gulliver guy in my guild mentioned this to me. There's 3 pots there, and I think this is something they could really take advantage of. My personal suggestion would be if they threw in an essence, say a greater essence from the Wisp, a greater essence from the Alpha Buck, and another greater essence from some other creature, whether it be Mother, or whether it's, say, the boss at the end of the Skywound Mine when that's released. You bring them all to here, and then you summon a boss. That would be a good way to finish off this zone. I think it'd be really cool if the hand that's above the waterfall actually comes out of the waterfall and you fight that as a boss. I think would be kind of interesting. Not just because I think it would be interesting, but on my previous videos, a large amount of the comments that I made and adjustments that I suggested were made in this particular build. Now, it could be coincidental that the vast majority of what I said was changed. It might have been just because a lot of it was common sense, but in the odd case that the developers are actually listening to these videos from my small channel, then there's a potential thing to make the game a bit interesting. So hopefully they keep building up, and that'll be all for now. Have a good day.